When flames devour her penthouse and smoke steals her breath, heiress Camilla Astor expects to die until a brooding janitor crashes through the inferno like a knight without armor. What begins as a rescue ignites into a love so fierce it threatens to consume everything they both thought they knew. Like sizzling second chances, billionaire twists, and rough hands on velvet hearts, smash that like button and subscribe for more romance that burns. Camilla Astor stood barefoot on the cool marble floor of her penthouse, one hand wrapped loosely around a crystal tumbler of untouched whiskey. Beyond the glass walls of the Astor Tower, Manhattan shimmered in a halo of gold and silver, glittering from every streetlight and chandeliered high-rise. The city looked alive, but inside her, everything felt eerily still. Her father had just left, his cologne still lingering like smoke in the air, his final words echoing like a gavel through her ribs. "This empire will be yours when you stop acting like a girl and start thinking like an Astor." She hated that sentence. She hated how easily he made her feel like a spoiled child, despite the fact she was 30, graduated magna cum laude, and had tripled the returns on their third-quarter portfolio. Her father didn't care about numbers or grit. He cared about control. Camilla's mother had died when she was 10, and her father had slowly filled that silence with command, with granite expectations and luxury as compensation. She had never asked for this life, only inherited it like a mansion she couldn't exit. Outside, a flash of red on the skyline caught her eye. The city blinked again. A pulse of light reflected in the window, and for a moment she thought it was from a news chopper. Then the fire alarm screeched through the apartment like a banshee. Her glass hit the floor and shattered. The sprinkler system didn't activate. She blinked hard, disoriented, the smell of smoke already reaching her. Then came the heat. It was real, a thick, acrid heat that pressed itself into her lungs. She turned toward the hallway. Flames were curling beneath the bottom of the door. Camilla lunged backward, choking on the smoke as her heart thundered. She grabbed her phone and tapped the emergency number for building security, but the signal wouldn't connect. The air had shifted. Something was wrong with the ventilation system. She staggered toward the exit, but when she touched the handle, it burned her palm. Panic flooded her like gasoline. She turned in circles, disoriented. This was a luxury penthouse, top floor of the newest Astor development, outfitted with state-of-the-art security and climate control. Yet now, it was a death trap. The smart home system had gone offline. The only other way out was the service stairwell on the other end of the floor, and she wasn't sure it was accessible anymore. Downstairs, Griffin Cole mopped the gleaming tile of the 24th floor lobby. His earbuds were in, not for music, but to block out the daily stream of condescension from tenants who barely acknowledged his existence. He liked the night shift. It meant fewer eyes, fewer reminders of how far he'd fallen. He glanced at his watch. Almost time for his break. That's when he smelled it. Not the chemical tang of industrial floor cleaner, but something older, hotter, more sinister. Burning plastic, burning wood, fire. Griffin yanked the earbuds out and scanned the hallway. The indicator light on the elevator panel had frozen. A flicker of red glowed from above. Then came the distant thud, almost like a burst pipe, but deeper. He turned toward the emergency panel and pulled the fire alarm. No response. The digital screen was dead. Years of instinct kicked in, honed from construction jobs and from being the only parent to a 7-year-old who thought bedtime stories should include disaster prep. He grabbed the radio clipped to his belt, but even that crackled with static. Something was seriously wrong. He bolted for the stairwell and took the stairs 2 at a time. By the time he reached the 32nd floor, smoke was already thick in the air. He ripped off his jacket and used it as a makeshift mask. At 36, his knees screamed with every step, but he kept climbing. He didn't know who was up there, only that someone probably was. The penthouse corridor was swallowed in gray. Alarms wailed distantly. muffled and irregular, as if dying out one by one. Griffin moved low and fast, hugging the wall, eyes narrowed against the smoke. He reached the door labeled PHA. There were no flames here yet, but the metal knob was searing hot. Someone was inside. He pounded once. No answer. Then again, louder. This time, he heard movement. A shadow. A voice. "I'm in here." It was a woman's voice. Strained. Shaking. Still coherent. "Step back from the door," Griffin called, muffled by the fabric over his face. He stepped back and kicked hard. Once, twice, then a third time. The frame cracked and gave way. Smoke poured out like a monster freed. Inside, the room was a dizzying chaos of light and darkness. A woman stood barefoot, hair wild, face streaked with soot, eyes wide and terrified. Griffin grabbed her wrist. "We have to go. Now." She didn't argue. That was the first miracle. The second was that the corridor hadn't collapsed yet. He led her to the emergency stairwell, guiding her like a dancer through the smoke, her small hand clutched in his. Her body trembled with each step, but she didn't scream. He counted every floor aloud as they descended, grounding her in his voice. 32, 29, 25. When they hit the 20th floor, they were met by firefighters charging up in full gear. They took Camilla's arm, wrapped her in a fireproof blanket. Paramedics were already waiting in the lobby. Griffin staggered into the cooler air and braced himself on a marble pillar, lungs heaving, vision speckled. The woman he'd carried through the stairwell was now surrounded by flashing lights and oxygen masks. For a moment, he thought that was it. She was safe. It was over. Then she looked back at him, past the EMTs, past the chaos. Their eyes locked. "Wait," she said, her voice hoarse but commanding. "What's your name?" He blinked, wiped soot from his brow. "Griffin," he said. She smiled, even as tears cut clean tracks down her ash-covered cheeks. "I'm Camilla," she said, "and you just saved my life." He nodded once, unsure what else to say. But in that moment, beneath the red pulse of emergency lights and the acrid taste of smoke, something passed between them, not just gratitude, not just adrenaline. Something deeper, something burning, and neither of them would ever be the same again. Camilla Astor had never felt small in her own city until now. The following morning, she stood in front of what remained of the Astor Tower penthouse, wrapped in a navy trench coat someone on the crisis team had handed her. Behind her, glass crunched beneath the boots of the fire marshal. The upper floors of the tower were charred and sealed off with yellow tape, windows blown out like the sockets of a skull. Reporters swarmed at the barricades, shouting her name. She did not answer. Her voice was still raw from the smoke. Her lungs burned when she breathed too deeply. The fire had started somewhere in the electrical system, they said. A freak power surge. A perfect storm of failed backups. But none of the explanations made her feel less violated. This building had been her personal sanctuary. She had designed every inch. Now it stood broken, blackened, and hollowed out. The only thing that still made sense was the memory of his hand. Large, calloused, warm against her wrist. Camilla had not been able to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face emerge from the smoke, jaw set, eyes steady, voice calm. She could barely remember his name, Griffin. That was all he had said. No last name, no job title, but she had watched him climb out of the fire with her as though it were nothing more than a locked door. He had saved her life, and then he had disappeared into the night like some myth with a mop. She turned to the head of security who was barking orders at the crew trying to secure the building. He looked startled when she addressed him. "Find him. The man who pulled me out. I want a name, a file, something. Now." Within an hour, she had what she needed. Griffin Cole. employed through a third-party janitorial contractor, worked odd shifts. No record of disciplinary action, though his file was sparse. He had a daughter, 7 years old. Lived in a small apartment on the Lower East Side. No spouse listed. No emergency contact. Camilla didn't wait for approval. She left in one of the unmarked cars from the company fleet and told the driver to take her to the address on file. He glanced at her through the rearview mirror, unsure if he should question it, but wisely said nothing. She arrived at a walk-up with peeling paint and rusted railings. Children's chalk drawings covered the sidewalk. A girl's pink bike leaned against the stairwell. She climbed the steps alone and knocked on the door with more force than she meant to. It opened after a few seconds. He stood there in a black t-shirt and sweatpants, barefoot, hair damp like he had just showered. No hint of recognition crossed his face at first, and then she saw it, a flicker of surprise that quickly morphed into guarded resignation. Camilla. Griffin. You shouldn't be here. I didn't come for a press op, she said. I came because I owe you my life, and I'm not good at letting debts go unpaid. His jaw shifted as if he wanted to argue, but a small voice interrupted them both. Daddy, who is it? A little girl peeked around his leg, her curls wild, her eyes impossibly round. She looked nothing like him, and yet somehow shared his quiet intensity. This is Camilla. She's someone I helped last night. The girl nodded solemnly, then vanished again into the apartment. Griffin stepped aside. You can come in if you want, he said, but I don't have any whiskey or china plates. I'll manage. The apartment was small, worn but clean. Toys lined the corner of the living room, and the scent of vanilla wafted from the kitchen. A dish towel hung from the oven handle, embroidered with a crooked, hand-drawn sun. It felt lived in, real. Camilla sat carefully on the edge of the couch while Griffin poured 2 mugs of coffee. He handed her one, then sat across from her, elbows on his knees, watching her with the wary eyes of a man who had been cornered before and didn't enjoy it. You're not used to being thanked, are you? She said. I didn't do it for thanks. I know. That's why it matters. He stared at his coffee for a long moment. Look, I didn't even know who you were when I pulled you out. You were just a person who needed help. And now? Now you're sitting in my living room wearing a coat that probably costs more than my rent. Camilla smiled, but it was brittle. She took a slow breath and let her eyes settle on his face. You saved my life. You could have walked away. You didn't. I want to do something. Anything. Let me help you the way you helped me. Griffin laughed under his breath, not with joy but disbelief. Help me how? You gonna buy me a new mop? Don't be dense. I have properties sitting vacant across the city. There's a townhome in Chelsea, 2 bedrooms, clean, safe, yours, if you want it. He stood up abruptly, walking to the window, back tense. I don't want your pity or your charity. It's not charity, it's gratitude. And maybe a little self-interest, too. Because since I left that building, I haven't felt safe. Not physically, not emotionally. But when I was with you, I did. He turned to face her. You don't know me. Then let me. Griffin exhaled slowly, like he was holding in a storm and couldn't quite decide whether to release it. He glanced toward the hallway, where the faint sound of cartoon music played from a bedroom. Her mom left, he said quietly. 4 years ago. Cancer. Fast. I was on a roof when I got the call. I was installing solar panels, trying to save enough for our own place. I came back down and everything was different. I'm sorry. He nodded once. So I took night jobs. Cleaned floors, scrubbed grout with my bare hands. It gave me hours with her during the day. Pickups from school, homework help, stories before bed. You think I'm going to trade that for marble countertops? Camilla walked to him slowly, carefully, until they were standing only inches apart. No, I think you're going to trade it for nothing. I think you're going to let me say thank you the only way I know how. And if it doesn't work, you give it back. No strings, no press. Just a clean slate. Griffin didn't speak, but something in his eyes shifted. You're relentless, he said. I'm an aster, she replied. We specialize in it. The smallest smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. She thought she saw the beginning of something in that look. Not affection, not yet, but maybe permission. A beginning, and it was enough. The house in Chelsea was nothing like the penthouse, and that was the point. Camilla had chosen it because it was human-sized, because it had the kind of warmth and slightly crooked charm that real homes possessed. It had been sitting unclaimed in the Astor portfolio for months, intended as a short-term rental or a place to park international clients. Camilla had the locks changed, the heating checked, and the fridge stocked. She didn't hire anyone else to do it. She did it herself. Griffin didn't move in right away. For 2 days, he said nothing. Then, just as she was beginning to wonder if she had pushed too hard, a delivery van pulled into the narrow driveway, and a man in gray coveralls unloaded a toddler's bed, 2 boxes of clothes, and a second-hand guitar case. Griffin carried Lila across the threshold himself. No fanfare, no promises, just a quiet beginning. Camilla didn't visit for a week. She told herself it was to give them space, but in truth she was afraid. Afraid that he would change his mind. Afraid that now that they were out of the fire, he would no longer look at her the way he had when smoke filled the air and death was only a breath away. When she finally did come by, she brought dinner. Pasta from a little Italian place she used to go to as a student before her name began appearing on business magazines. She wore jeans and a white sweater, and she knocked instead of texting first. She wanted to see how he answered. He opened the door with flour on his forearm and Lila clinging to his side like a vine. Camilla held up the bag of food. I brought reinforcements, she said. Griffin stepped aside, and this time he smiled before speaking. We were just making cookies. Come in before she makes me eat another one of her experimental frosting combinations. The house smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. The dining table was a simple wood slab, worn at the edges. A basket of fresh laundry sat unfolded on the couch. Lila led Camilla by the hand into the kitchen and introduced her to a gingerbread man she had named Harold. Camilla laughed and listened with a seriousness that made Lila beam with pride. Later, after dinner, Griffin and Camilla sat on the small back porch while Lila fell asleep inside, with a book twice her size resting on her chest. The night was soft. The city murmured in the distance, but the courtyard was quiet. Camilla curled her fingers around a cup of tea, unsure how to begin. Thank you for letting me come. Griffin nodded, eyes fixed on the stars above the neighboring rooftops. His silence never felt cold, only considered. She continued, I haven't stopped thinking about that night. Not just the fire. You. The way you just appeared and didn't hesitate. The way you saw me and didn't ask who I was or what I was worth. You just pulled me out. Griffin looked at her now, his profile cut against the faint glow of the porch light. I would have done the same for anyone. But you didn't do it for anyone. You did it for me. A long pause stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but taut with the things neither of them had yet dared to name. Camilla set her cup down. Tell me something real, something about you that's not in a file. Griffin rubbed his jaw with the back of his hand. All right. I used to play guitar in a band, back before Lila. We weren't great, but we thought we were. We used to pack out little bars in Brooklyn and pretend like the city belonged to us. Camilla smiled. That's better than anything in your HR file. Your turn. She hesitated, then reached for honesty. I used to write stories. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a novelist. I'd sneak into the library at the estate and stay there for hours, imagining people who weren't me. Then my mother died, and my father told me I had to grow up. So I stopped writing and started memorizing financial projections. Griffin didn't laugh. He didn't flinch. He just looked at her the same way he had in the fire. Direct, steady, unflinching. Maybe it's time to start writing again. She shook her head, but the idea lingered like a half-remembered dream. He reached for her hand. She let him. Their fingers laced without hesitation, and when he turned his palm up to hers, she saw the roughness of it, the calluses, the tiny scars. It was a hand that had worked, that had held grief and hope at the same time, a hand that had saved her. She traced the line of his thumb and felt something tighten in her chest. The moment stretched again, this time fragile and electric. She leaned in first. Her lips brushed his. A breath, a pause. Then she kissed him again, slower, deeper, as if something in her had waited years for this and had only just realized it. Griffin didn't stop her, but when they parted, he pulled back just slightly. "Camilla, I need to say something before this goes further." She tensed. "I'm not built for your world. I can't sit at gala dinners and smile through conversations about capital gains and luxury development. I fix things with my hands. I clean up messes. I don't belong in the pictures people take of you." She didn't look away. "Then stop thinking about what you are not, and start thinking about what you are." "What's that?" "The man I can't stop thinking about. The man who makes me want to be real again." Griffin closed his eyes for a moment, as if steadying himself against a truth that had finally become too loud to ignore. He let go of her hand. "I need time," he said. She nodded. It hurt, but she understood. Camilla rose, stepped back into the house, and kissed Lila gently on the forehead before she left. The little girl stirred and whispered something in her sleep. Camilla stepped into the night, wrapped in the ache of wanting and the certainty that something between them had changed. Not broken, not ended, just paused. And somewhere behind her, Griffin sat with his head in his hands, unsure how to hold something he wanted so badly without breaking it. Camilla Astor disappeared for 3 days. She shut off her phone, left a brief message with her assistant, and drove her mother's old convertible out past the edge of the city. She needed air. Not the kind that filled boardrooms and luxury spas, but the kind that wrapped itself around your arms and reminded you that you had lungs and skin and a heart that still beat without a calendar. She stayed at a small inn near a lake she used to visit as a child. It was off-season, nearly empty, and smelled like pine needles and damp wood. She ate toast for dinner and walked barefoot along the rocks in the morning. It was the first time in months that no one called her name for a quote, a meeting, or a photo. She did not think about Griffin at first. She tried not to, but it was like trying to forget a sound after it had burrowed itself into your bones. His silence pressed against her as much as his touch had. On the third night, she lit a fire in the stone hearth and sat in front of it with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She pulled a notebook from her bag, one she had packed without thinking, and opened it. The pages were blank. Her pen hovered. Then she wrote, not about corporate takeovers or housing projections or even her family legacy. She wrote about heat and breath and a pair of hands pulling her through darkness. She wrote about a girl in silk and a man who wore his past like armor. She wrote until the fire burned low and the coffee tasted like ash. She wrote until she remembered what it felt like to want something because it was hers, not because it had been given. When she returned to the city, she didn't go back to the tower. It was still closed for investigation anyway. Instead, she went home. Not the Astor estate in the countryside or the sleek loft she kept uptown for appearances. She went to the Chelsea house. She knocked again. This time, Griffin opened the door with flour on his shirt and music playing from a speaker in the kitchen. Lila shouted her name before she even stepped inside. Camilla laughed and knelt to hug the little girl, who wrapped her arms around Camilla's neck like they had known each other for years. Griffin stood aside again, but this time, he didn't hide behind his silence. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," he said. "I wasn't sure either, she answered. But you did. I did. They ate dinner together, the three of them. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. Nothing plated, nothing curated. Griffin told stories about his band days, and Camilla listened with her whole body, leaning in, smiling with her eyes. Lila fell asleep halfway through the meal, head on the armrest, crayons still in hand. Griffin covered her with a blanket and sat beside Camilla on the floor. Their knees touched. He didn't speak for a long time. I never meant to push you away, he said. You didn't push. You paused. I thought I needed to protect her, protect myself. I've built this life out of scraps. I didn't want to let you come in and clean it up like it was just another broken thing on your list. You think I came to fix you? I don't know. Maybe I was afraid you could. Camilla reached for his hand. This time, he didn't pull away. You saved me, Griffin. And not just from the fire. That night, I remembered what fear felt like. Not the kind that follows you through a boardroom or lurks in shareholder meetings. Real fear. The kind that makes you realize how alone you've been in a room full of people who smile at your name and know nothing about your soul. Griffin looked at her then. Really looked. And she saw it in him, too. The quiet ache of someone who had spent years surviving instead of living. The relief of being seen. They kissed again. No flames, no urgency, just mouths meeting in the hush of a home where nothing needed to be proved. When they pulled apart, Camilla rested her forehead against his shoulder. I could stay, she whispered. You already are, he said. Later that week, Camilla helped Lila with her science project. They turned the kitchen into a volcano assembly line, using newspaper and glue and red paint that somehow ended up on all three of them. Lila beamed when the paper mountain erupted with baking soda and vinegar. Camilla beamed with her. She had meetings too, quiet ones that mattered. She began reviewing her father's portfolio with new eyes. She saw buildings where families could live, not just where profits could grow. She pulled up records on foreclosures, on outdated development plans that could be reimagined. She started sketching outlines for a new initiative, one that would fund affordable housing projects in underserved areas of the city. She called it Phoenix, after what rises from the fire. When she pitched the idea to her father, he laughed at first. Then he frowned. Then he reminded her of her name. You are not a charity worker, Camilla. You are an Astor. I'm also a person, she replied. You'll ruin the company. No. I'll remake it. He slammed his hand on the table. For a moment, she thought he would disown her. Then she realized she no longer cared. The only home she wanted was a rented house in Chelsea with a little girl who called her by name and a man who kissed her like she was not porcelain, but iron and fire and something worth rebuilding around. That night, she walked back into that house with her shoulders squared and her jaw set. Griffin was on the couch, guitar in hand, Lila asleep beside him. He looked up as she entered. How'd it go? She dropped her bag, took off her coat. It's my company now, she said. Griffin raised an eyebrow. And what are you going to do with an empire? She smiled. Hand it to someone who deserves it. The boardroom was colder than Camilla remembered. Even the lights seemed sterile, too bright, too polished, as if they had been scrubbed of any sign of life. Every seat at the long, dark table was occupied. Her father sat at the head, the corner of his mouth turned downward as if he had tasted something sour the moment she entered. His expression never changed as she approached, never softened. He didn't rise. He didn't offer a greeting. Camilla took her seat slowly, her notes tucked in a simple folder. She didn't bring slides or a personal assistant. She brought only the truth, and her decision. Before anyone could speak, she did. I've decided to assume full operational control of Astor Holdings' real estate division. Effective immediately, my team will begin transitioning the pending luxury contracts into mixed-income housing developments under the new Phoenix initiative. Her father's silence was deafening, but it was not what unnerved the board. It was the calm in Camilla's voice, the way her back didn't bend under the weight of their stares, the way she looked, not like someone asking permission, but like someone accepting responsibility. One of the senior board members, a man who had watched her grow up and once handed her a juice box during a quarterly meeting, cleared his throat. "And how exactly do you plan to fund this Phoenix project?" "We will reallocate 5% of the quarterly investment pool, which, based on the latest numbers, still puts us ahead of last year's earnings. We will also divest from 2 international properties currently sitting idle and redirect those assets into a pilot housing block. From there, we scale." Another voice, this time sharper, female. "You mean you'll sell off Astor Capital to build homes for people who will never be clients?" "They will be. Not today, maybe not tomorrow. But we have the power to shape what this city becomes, and I'm not interested in building more castles in the sky. I want foundations." Her father finally spoke. "This is sentiment, not strategy." Camilla met his eyes. They were the same color, cold blue, sharp as glass. "No, this is a pivot. We are not abandoning wealth. We are investing in something that actually lasts." "And what would that be?" "People." The room held stillness like breath. Afterward, she stepped outside into the late afternoon light, her heart still hammering in her chest. She wanted to scream, or dance, or cry. Instead, she walked. She found herself at the Chelsea house without remembering how she got there. The moment she opened the door, Lila came running, arms outstretched, her ponytail bouncing. Camilla caught her in a hug, and for a second, the boardroom melted. The sharp edges of her father's voice faded. Griffin appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding a dish towel and looking at her with a question in his eyes. She nodded before he could ask. "It's done," she said. He stepped forward and took the dish towel from his shoulder, tossing it onto the counter before walking to her. He didn't say anything, just pulled her into his arms. She let herself sink into him, into the warmth of his neck and the weight of his hands on her back. That night, they didn't talk about strategy or press releases. They ate pizza on paper plates and let Lila pick the movie. They sat on the couch, bodies leaning against each other, the quiet comfort of the ordinary wrapping around them like a shared secret. Later, after Lila had fallen asleep curled beside her, Griffin walked Camilla outside, where the cool night smelled faintly of spring rain and distant lilacs. They stood on the porch as the city hummed far away, and for a moment, the world felt like something manageable. He slipped his hand into hers. "You really did it." "Not alone." He smiled. "You ever think maybe we're not as different as we thought? Maybe the whole world spends too much time pretending people have to live in separate boxes, rich and poor, clean and broken, worthy and not." She leaned into him, resting her cheek against his chest. "I used to think I needed to become something else to be loved, that I had to earn it by shrinking or hardening. But now, all I want is this, you, Lila, the life we make." Griffin tilted her chin up, kissed her slow, then slower still. The next morning, the press had a field day. Heiress turns housing advocate. Astor shakeup leaves industry stunned. Is this the end of luxury as we know it? Camilla ignored it all. She met with her newly appointed project manager, reviewed blueprints for Phoenix Grove, and personally visited the lot where the first development would rise. It had once been a parking structure, cold and forgotten, a place where people loitered or disappeared. Now it would become the first of many homes where mothers would tuck in their children and wake up to something that felt like promise. Griffin stood beside her, hard hat on, clipboard in hand, looking more comfortable than she had ever seen him in a suit. "You ready to run a team?" she asked. "I've been running one since the day Lila was born." He smiled and pulled a pen from behind his ear. "Then let's build something no one forgets." It started small. A meeting here, a foundation poured there, community outreach. volunteer programs. Slowly, her name became more than a headline. It became a whispered promise among families who had long stopped believing anyone in a tailored coat cared what happened to them. But the world did not give up power quietly. Camilla's father sent her an envelope. Inside it, a printed email. Anonymous, blunt, and threatening. She read it twice. This wasn't just about corporate discomfort or shareholder resistance. Someone wanted her project to fail, and they were willing to do more than whisper. She folded the email and slipped it into her coat pocket. Griffin saw the change in her as soon as she walked through the front door. What happened? She shook her head. We're not just making people nervous. We're making them desperate. He took the envelope when she handed it over, read the words, then looked at her, the fire of that night flickering in his eyes again. Then we fight smarter, he said. And together, Camilla stepped onto the gala stage wearing a black dress that caught the light, like still water, quiet but impossible to ignore. Her heels clicked once against the polished wood as she took her place in front of the podium. For a moment, she let the silence hang. Her father watched from the third row, jaw tight, hands folded in his lap like stone. Around him, the astroboards sat in careful formation, their suits impeccable, their expressions unreadable. She adjusted the microphone. Thank you for being here. Some of you came to celebrate, some came to observe, some came because they are afraid not to. Whatever brought you, I'm glad you are here, because tonight is not about names or inheritance or real estate portfolios. It is about starting over. The crowd shifted. Glasses clinked faintly. One camera flashed, then another. She continued, This city is not made of steel and glass. It is made of stories, of people who burn and rebuild, of families who refuse to give up, of second chances. The Phoenix Initiative is not a publicity campaign. It is a promise that we will invest in each other, that we will build homes, not just high-rises, that we will recognize the dignity in lives that do not come with headlines or generational wealth. She paused. Her breath was steady. The man who saved my life is here tonight. You may not know his name. You may have never seen him in a photograph or a press release. But when the walls closed in and the air turned to smoke, it was his hand that pulled me out. Not because I am an Astor, not because he had anything to gain, but because that is who he is. She turned slightly, her eyes finding him across the room. Griffin Cole, please stand. He did not want to. She could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, in the way his eyes searched the floor before rising. But he did. Slowly, straight-backed. Lila clung to his leg in a blue dress Camilla had picked out with her just 3 days earlier. The room applauded, not loud at first, then more, then louder. Not a standing ovation, but more than polite. Griffin nodded once, sat back down. The applause quieted. Camilla returned to the mic. This is the future I believe in. One where the heroes among us do not vanish into alleyways. One where power is not hoarded but shared. And one where little girls like Lila Cole grow up knowing they belong not just in a rented apartment but in the heart of the city itself. She stepped away as the crowd rose again. This time she did not watch them clap. She walked off the stage, heart pounding, mouth dry. She did not want praise. She wanted impact. Real, measurable, solid. Backstage, Griffin waited for her, his tie slightly askew, his eyes darker than usual. That was a hell of a speech, he said. You hated it. I hated that you had to say it. She reached for his hand. Did it help? It helped the people who need to hear it, but it also made you a target. I already was. Now you are visible. She looked at him, really looked. He was tired, not in a way that could be fixed by sleep, but in the way a man becomes when he carries too much for too long. Still, he stood beside her. Still, he had come. Come with me, she said. Where? She didn't answer, just walked. He followed. They climbed a stairwell behind the event hall, up past the dressing rooms, past the kitchen exhaust vents, until they reached the roof. The air was cooler up there, cleaner. The city lay beneath them, wide and glowing, pulsing with light and life. Camilla took a deep breath. "This is where I used to dream," she said. "Here? Not this roof, but one like it. When I was younger, I would sneak out during events like this and just stand above everything. Imagine what it would be like to start over. Be someone else. Someone without a last name that turned every door into a corridor of expectation." Griffin said nothing. He stepped beside her, put his arm around her. "You still could," he said. She looked at him. "What if I don't want to be someone else anymore? Then maybe you are finally who you were meant to be." She rested her head on his shoulder. "What if I want more?" "Like what?" "Like this. Like you. Like a life that doesn't vanish once the headlines fade. I want to wake up in that house in Chelsea and not wonder what I have to prove. I want to walk Lila to school and fight about what cereal she can have. I want to build something that is mine, not inherited, not branded, just mine." Griffin turned to her fully now. His hand cupped her cheek. "Then take it." He kissed her again, soft and certain. Later that night, as the city slept, Camilla read the message again. The threat was clear. Someone did not want Phoenix Grove to exist. Someone with power and connections. She had enemies now. Not critics, not rivals. Enemies. She thought of her father's face during the speech, the way his mouth had flattened as the crowd rose to their feet, the way he had not clapped. Not once. The next morning, Camilla met with her legal team. Quietly, carefully. She asked for a list of board members with recent anonymous transactions. She requested a trace on the origin of the printed message. She sent a message of her own through a press secretary, subtle and sharp. Astor Holdings would not be intimidated, and neither would she. Meanwhile, Griffin began walking the site of the first Phoenix build. He met with architects and city inspectors, with engineers and electricians. He knew the work, knew what mattered, knew how to read a lie in the bones of a blueprint. One day, while reviewing the layout of the electrical system, he noticed something odd. A misplaced conduit. A code violation masked as a revision. His gut told him this was not incompetence. It was sabotage. He took the blueprint to Camilla. "Someone is trying to bury this project before it starts," he said. She nodded. "I know. What do? We find out who. Then we burn down everything they built to hide." Griffin smiled without warmth. "Let's do it. Together? Always." The apartment was dark except for the light coming from the hallway, and Griffin sat with the blueprint unrolled across the kitchen table. Camilla stood behind him, arms folded, her eyes tracing the faint pencil marks someone had tried to erase and redraw. It had taken only a few days for the architect to confirm what Griffin already suspected. The electrical system had been tampered with, not at the construction site, but at the planning level. The person responsible had inserted a flaw that could cause a fire under the right conditions. And that flaw had been in the plans for the Astor Tower, too. Griffin pointed to the notation. "It is the same hand," he said. "Same adjustment, same phrasing. Whoever did this wanted you scared." Camilla nodded, quiet. He looked up at her. "We have to take this to someone." She turned away and stared out the window. The city moved like a machine below them. She felt a chill across her skin. "I know who did it," she said. Griffin straightened. "You're sure?" She reached for her phone and opened a message. "I cross-checked signatures on the site documents with emails from our design team over the past 6 months. There's only one person with access to both the plans and the authority to override safety systems without red flags. His name is Simon Varel, senior board member, longtime advisor to my father. He was part of the Astor Tower development and served as liaison for half our overseas contractors. He knew I was going to replace him. He knew what Phoenix Grove meant. Griffin's jaw tightened. You think he caused the fire? I think he tried to scare me. The fire might have been an accident, but the error that allowed it was not. It was planted. And he made sure I would be in that penthouse when it happened. Griffin stood slowly, the muscles in his arms flexing with tension. That means it wasn't just sabotage. It was attempted murder. Camilla looked at him then, her voice barely a whisper. And we have to prove it. The next week unfolded in quiet bursts of urgency. Camilla and Griffin met privately with legal counsel and a cyber forensics specialist who had worked on city corruption cases. They provided every document they could find. Access logs, design revisions, construction orders, emails. They were careful, silent, no press, no internal alerts, just careful observation. Meanwhile, Phoenix Grove's launch was delayed under the guise of permitting setbacks. Griffin took over the site management personally, keeping workers on half shifts and inspecting every shipment himself. He made sure Lila stayed with a trusted friend after school and avoided public exposure. He didn't say it, but Camilla could tell. He was afraid something might happen to them too. One night, after hours of reviewing documents, they sat on the couch, both too tired to speak. Lila had already gone to sleep upstairs, a book still open beside her pillow. Camilla leaned against Griffin, their fingers intertwined, but their bodies heavy with unspoken weight. She finally spoke. I keep thinking about that night. The fire. What if you hadn't been there? He kissed the top of her head. But I was. And what if someone tries again? Then I will be again. She looked up at him. Her eyes were sharp now, determined. I want to see this through. All of it. I want to expose him. Then we do it together. The next day, Camilla scheduled a private board meeting. No press, no agenda, just a quiet request that they meet on the 42nd floor of the Astor Tower in a temporarily restored conference room. The symbolism was intentional. She wanted Simon to feel comfortable. She wanted him close. Griffin waited outside the room with the investigator and a security officer who had worked on federal fraud cases. The plan was simple. Camilla would lead the conversation, introduce the subject of project oversight, and present the flawed blueprints. Simon would likely interrupt, deny involvement. Maybe he would even laugh. But when she revealed the forged signature next to the electrical revision, and then produced the digital trail linking his access credentials to the night of the change, they would have everything they needed. Not just for termination, for prosecution. Camilla entered the room last. She wore dark blue and no jewelry. Her hair was pulled back. She spoke with clarity and ease, her voice confident but not aggressive. She laid out the plans, the errors, and the investigation. She did not accuse. She asked for transparency. Simon folded his arms and smiled thinly. Are you suggesting that someone within this board orchestrated an arson to keep you from building housing for the underpaid and overappreciated? Camilla didn't flinch. I am suggesting that someone used their position to compromise the safety of our buildings, and that the same error appears in two unrelated developments, one of which nearly cost me my life. He leaned back in his chair. You have no proof. Actually, we do. She pressed a button on her phone, and the door opened. Griffin stepped in, followed by the security officer. The investigator carried a folder thick with documentation. Camilla didn't look at her father, who sat stone-faced in the corner. She looked only at Simon. This is a formal presentation of evidence to the board. You are welcome to respond, but I advise you to do so with counsel present. Simon's face changed. Not quickly, but like ice cracking in the sun. First disbelief, then anger, then a hint of fear. You're making a mistake, he said. No, you did, Camilla answered. The boardroom held its breath. By the end of the meeting, Simon was escorted from the building. No one clapped, no one cheered, but several members approached Camilla quietly, and offered their thanks. Her father said nothing. He walked past her, slow and silent, and did not turn back. That evening, back in Chelsea, Camilla sat on the porch with Griffin while Lila decorated cupcakes inside. The air was cool. The street was quiet. She watched the sky for a long time before speaking. "It's over." Griffin nodded. "He won't touch you again." Camilla smiled faintly. "He already did, but not in the way he intended." She leaned against his shoulder. "He tried to burn down everything, and we're still standing." Griffin brushed his lips against her hair. "Not just standing, building." And Camilla, for the first time in her life, believed that she truly was. Rain fell steady on the morning of the Phoenix Grove, groundbreaking. Not a storm, just a quiet, unrelenting drizzle that darkened the fresh dirt and turned the grass to slick ribbons. Camilla stood beneath a clear umbrella in a simple gray coat, watching as workers hammered temporary signage into place. The banner stretched across the chain-link fence read, "A place to begin again." It had been Griffin's phrase. She had written it in her notebook the night he said it, and now it stood 10 feet tall in block letters, facing the street where families would one day walk their children home. She had expected nerves. Instead, she felt something like peace. Griffin arrived from the site trailer wearing boots caked in mud and a collared shirt he had tried to keep clean. It failed, but she loved him more for it. He handed her a steaming paper cup of coffee and brushed a few drops of rain from her cheek with the back of his hand. "We still on schedule?" she asked. He nodded. One of the supply trucks was delayed, but nothing critical. "Concrete crews ahead of pace. You'll be breaking ground today, even if I have to dig it myself." She smiled, took the coffee, and leaned into his warmth for a brief moment before pulling away. The press van arrived not long after, followed by a few city officials, 2 local councilwomen, and 3 residents from the neighborhood who had been early partners in the community approval process. Camilla made sure they were all greeted first. She shook hands, answered questions, and posed for photos only when asked. When the small platform was ready, she stepped up and waited for the sound tech to signal. A few umbrellas popped open in the crowd. Others just stood damp, watching her with curiosity, admiration, or in a few cases, cautious skepticism. She kept her speech short. She talked about second chances, about the night that changed everything. She spoke of Griffin, though not by name, and of what it meant to be pulled from a fire and realize that some walls were not worth rebuilding. She spoke of Lila, of homes that held laughter instead of isolation, of a new blueprint for the city, one built not just in concrete and steel, but in courage. Then she lifted the ceremonial shovel, pressed it into the soil, and turned the earth. It felt simple, and yet somehow holy. Later, while others lingered to network or celebrate, Camilla walked the foundation lines alone. Griffin found her near the southwest corner where the first housing unit would rise. "You all right?" he asked. "I was just thinking. My whole life, I was told the ground matters most, that where you build determines everything. But no one ever talked about who helps you stand once the structure is gone." He touched her hand, then pulled her into a hug. "You built this. No one handed it to you." "Not true. You handed me the first breath when I couldn't take one on my own." Griffin kissed her forehead. "The rest, though, that was all you." Weeks passed. Phoenix Grove took shape in steel and sweat and early mornings. Griffin hired a crew he trusted, many of them former laborers who had been passed over by larger contractors. Camilla brought Lila to the site on weekends, and the girl learned the difference between a beam and a joist before her next birthday. They ate lunch from paper bags and sat on the back of trucks, watching cranes lift walls into place. Camilla's days filled quickly. Interviews, budget reviews, long meetings with city zoning officials. But no matter how far the day stretched, she returned to the house in Chelsea each night. Some nights, Griffin was still awake, reading building permits or sketching updates. Some nights, he was already asleep with Lila curled against his side. On those nights, Camilla would crawl into bed quietly and just listen to them breathe. One evening, she came home late, soaked through from a surprise downpour, her phone buzzing with calls she ignored. Griffin opened the door before she could knock. She looked at him with tired eyes and dropped her bag on the floor. "I think I forgot how to rest." He pulled her inside, took her coat, and kissed her without words. Then he lit candles, not for romance, but because he knew the scent of cedar and honey calmed her. He ran a bath and let her soak while he made tea. When she came out, wrapped in an old robe of his that was 2 sizes too big, she found him at the table, papers pushed aside, tea steaming. "Sit," he said. She did. They drank in silence. She reached for his hand. "I think I'm afraid of what comes next. When this is built, when the headlines stop, what if I don't know how to be just me?" Griffin turned her hand over and traced the inside of her wrist. "You're not just you anymore. You're part of us. And that doesn't end when the cement dries." Lila's voice floated down the stairs a few minutes later, sleep-thick and curious. "Is Mommy home?" Camilla froze. Griffin smiled gently. "She's talking about you." Camilla stood, heart full and breaking at the same time. She climbed the stairs and knelt beside Lila's bed. The little girl's eyes blinked open, then closed again as she murmured, "You missed story time." Camilla kissed her forehead. "Tell me which one, and I'll read it twice tomorrow." Lila smiled without opening her eyes. "The one with the girl in the tower, the one who climbs down instead of waiting." Camilla whispered a promise and stayed until the girl's breathing evened. Downstairs, Griffin waited at the bottom step. "She called me Mommy," Camilla said softly. He reached up, touched her cheek. "You are." Camilla closed her eyes and leaned into him. The rain had stopped, but her hair was still damp. He ran his fingers through it as if he could smooth the doubts from her mind. "This is the life I want," she said. "Then it's already yours." The next morning, before dawn, Camilla stood in the living room looking out at the quiet street. Her phone buzzed. She checked the message and stilled. It was from her legal team. The investigation into Simon Varel had uncovered more than anticipated. Embezzlement, bribery, a network of shadow agreements across 6 city contracts, enough to end more than a career. Enough to change the skyline. She closed the message and turned toward the stairs. Griffin, still half asleep, was already rising. "What is it?" he asked. She looked at him and smiled. "It's time." Time for what? Time to tear down more than walls. The conference room was bright with late morning light, filtered through tall windows that overlooked the city skyline. Camilla stood at the front, surrounded by members of the press, city officials, and community leaders. Every chair was filled. Cameras lined the back of the room. Microphones poked forward from sleek recording devices. She wore a simple navy dress and no jewelry, except a silver ring on her right hand that Griffin had given her one morning over coffee. No speeches, just a quiet offering that she had accepted without needing words. This press conference was not about Phoenix Grove or the Foundation's funding. It was about the reckoning. Camilla took a sip of water, looked out at the crowd, and began to speak with a calm that came from knowing she had earned the right to be heard. "The investigation into Simon Varel has concluded. What we discovered goes beyond a single act of sabotage. It reaches into the heart of this city's development contracts. For years, Mr. Varel used his position within Astor Holdings to manipulate construction bids, funnel money through fake vendors, and approve flawed infrastructure in projects that should have provided safe, lasting homes. He endangered lives. He endangered mine." There was no anger in her voice, only clarity. "We are cooperating with the district attorney's office. Formal charges have been filed. His assets connected to Astor Holdings have been frozen. Every project he touched will be reviewed. And the Phoenix Initiative will continue, not despite this, but because of it." Someone asked a question from the third row, about how deep the corruption went. She answered it without flinching. Another question followed, then another. When the press began circling back to her family name, she closed the folder and stood a little taller. This is not about legacy. It is not about my last name or his. It is about accountability and rebuilding what we nearly lost. She ended the conference and walked off the stage with measured steps, even though her heart pounded. Behind the curtain, Griffin was waiting. He wore his usual boots, clean jeans, and a jacket that still smelled faintly of sawdust. He didn't speak, just reached for her hand and held it. "It's done," she said. "Not yet," he replied. "Come with me." They drove across the bridge into the southern end of the city. The roads were damp, lined with half-empty storefronts and boarded buildings that once held barber shops, bakeries, family businesses that had vanished in the wave of redevelopment a decade ago. Griffin turned onto a side street and parked in front of a low building with a caved-in roof and broken signage. She looked at him. "What is this?" He stepped out and opened her door. "It's where I grew up." Camilla followed him to the edge of the cracked sidewalk. The air smelled of rust and damp earth. The building had been a grocery store once, owned by Griffin's uncle, then passed to his mother, who ran it until illness took her and the city took everything else. It had sat like this for years, forgotten and collapsing under the weight of disinterest. "I used to sit behind the register," he said. "I'd count coins while my mom talked to customers. She knew every name, every story. This place fed people, not just food. It made them feel like they mattered." Camilla stared at the broken windows. Her breath caught. "You want to save it?" "No," he said. "I want to start over. Make it what it was meant to be. A place that doesn't ask who you are before it lets you in." Camilla turned to him. "You want to run it?" He smiled. "I want to build it. Then let the neighborhood run it. Co-owned, co-staffed, grocery, community center, after-school program. We can afford it now. The foundation's grown. The funding is there. We just need to say yes." She stepped closer, looked up into his eyes. Then yes. They returned to the Chelsea house that evening with wind in their hair and dirt still on their shoes. Lila waited on the porch with a handmade sign that read "Welcome Home," with hearts drawn in every corner. She held it above her head until they both bent down to hug her, laughing. Camilla carried the laughter into the kitchen, where a casserole she had forgotten she prepared was now slightly overdone but still edible. They ate around the table as a storm moved in outside, the windows streaked with rain, the sound low and soothing. After dinner, Griffin cleared the plates while Camilla and Lila danced barefoot in the living room to music playing softly from the old radio. Camilla spun Lila in slow circles, then scooped her up and carried her like a toddler even though she was nearly too big. Lila giggled and asked to stay up late. Camilla said maybe. Later, when Lila finally fell asleep in her bed surrounded by stuffed animals and chapter books, Camilla stepped outside onto the back patio. Griffin joined her, 2 mugs of tea in his hands. She took one and leaned against the railing. "The city is changing," she said, "because you didn't wait for permission. Neither did you." They stood in silence for a while. Rain tapped against the overhang. Somewhere in the distance, the hum of late-night traffic rose and fell like breath. Camilla turned to him. "I have something else for you." He gave her a curious look. "Come with me tomorrow, to the site. The final unit's going in. I want you there when I give the ribbon-cutting speech. You don't need me for that." "I do. Because Phoenix Grove is not mine. It's ours. And I want to announce the next project there. The grocery. I want the whole city to see your name on it." He hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Then I'll be there." She smiled. "Good. Because Lila already picked out your shirt." Griffin laughed softly, shook his head. "You two are trouble." The next day, the crowd gathered in front of the new building. Phoenix Grove stood tall behind them, fresh paint shining, flowers blooming along the sidewalk in boxes planted by local kids. Families who had already moved in stood beside those who were next on the list. City officials arrived without security. No barriers, no cameras hidden behind tinted glass, just people. Camilla took the mic. This time she didn't prepare a speech. She spoke from memory. Phoenix Grove began as an idea, a dream to rebuild, not just better, but braver. But dreams don't build walls. People do. The man beside me turned blueprints into something you can walk into. He gave this city more than he was ever given, and now he's giving it back again. She turned to him. Griffin Cole, builder, father, partner. Phoenix Grove would not exist without you. He stepped forward. The applause was real. Afterward, Lila tugged at Camilla's hand. So what's next? Camilla crouched beside her. Next, we build something even bigger. Lila grinned. A castle? No. A community. Griffin smiled. Same thing. The sun was beginning to slip behind the rooftops of Chelsea, casting long shadows across the quiet street. Inside the house, soft music played from an old speaker in the kitchen, something low and warm with a steady rhythm. Camilla stood at the counter, slicing strawberries for the cake cooling beside her. The scent of vanilla and sugar lingered in the air. She wore a simple cotton dress, her feet bare on the tile floor, her hair loosely pinned up, strands curling down her neck. Lila was in the living room with colored pencils scattered across the coffee table, sketching something that looked like a garden with a giant slide. Griffin was on the floor beside her, watching with one hand resting on his knee and the other holding a mug of tea. He looked at peace. Not just rested, but centered in a way that made Camilla's chest ache with quiet gratitude. The doorbell rang once. Camilla glanced at the clock, wiped her hands on a towel, and opened the door to a delivery driver holding a plain envelope and a small white box. She signed for it without speaking. Inside the envelope was a card embossed with gold lettering. It was an invitation from the mayor's office, a recognition ceremony. They wanted to honor Phoenix Grove and the team behind it. Her name was listed in bold. Griffin's was listed beside hers. She closed the door gently and placed the envelope on the hallway table without mentioning it. That night was not about awards. It was about something simpler. A promise fulfilled. Later, as the house quieted and the evening air cooled, Camilla slipped upstairs and stood in the doorway of Lila's room. The girl had fallen asleep sideways across the bed, her drawing still clutched in one hand, her other arm draped over a stuffed bear with a missing eye. Camilla stepped inside, took the paper from her fingers, and smiled. It was the same garden, the same slide, but now there were 3 stick figures holding hands at the bottom of it. One of them wore a crown. The one in the middle had curly hair. She turned off the lamp, pulled the blanket up to Lila's chin, and kissed her forehead. Back downstairs, Griffin waited on the patio, 2 glasses of wine resting on the edge of the table beside a flickering candle. Camilla walked out and sat beside him. For a long moment, neither spoke. She took a sip of wine and looked at the sky. There were stars out tonight, faint through the haze, but visible. He reached for her hand. "Tomorrow is the ribbon cutting for the community grocery," he said. "Did you ever think we'd get this far?" "I did," she answered. "After you pulled me out of that fire. I knew then. I just didn't know how much it would change everything." He nodded slowly. "It changed me too. I used to think I would live small forever, that all I could do was hold on, protect what little I had. Then you walked into my world, and it didn't collapse. It grew." Camilla leaned her head against his shoulder. "I used to think power meant control, but now I know it means impact, and I would rather build something real than own something empty." They sat in silence again, listening to the hum of the street, the rustle of leaves, the distant laughter from an open window down the block, the kind of silence that feels earned. Griffin turned to her. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you." She lifted her head. "You're not going to propose again over takeout, are you?" He smiled. "No, not this time." He stood and reached into the pocket of his jacket, pulling out a velvet box. Camilla's breath caught. He opened it to reveal a simple gold ring, inset with a single stone that shimmered like water in sunlight. "I know we've already made promises. I know we've built a life, but I want to make it official. Not because it changes how I feel, but because I want to stand in front of everyone and say yes again. Yes to you. Yes to Lila. Yes to this whole beautiful, terrifying, incredible life we made." Camilla blinked back tears, her voice caught somewhere in her throat. She nodded. Yes. The ceremony was held 3 weeks later in the rooftop garden of one of their new developments, a building designed with green space on every floor and childcare built into the first level. The garden was filled with wildflowers and long wooden tables strung with lights, no tuxedos, no ballroom, just friends, family, and community. Camilla wore a white dress without a train. Lila stood between them, holding the rings. Griffin wore a light gray suit and could not stop smiling, even when the sun made him squint. They said vows written by hand, simple words, true words, promises of patience and growth, of forgiveness and presence. When Griffin said he would love her through every rebuild and every storm, Camilla kissed him before the officiant could finish the sentence. They danced barefoot under the lights. Lila insisted on spinning between them. People clapped and laughed and cried. The air was filled with music and the scent of fresh bread and the laughter of children playing tag between the tables. In the days that followed, life did not slow down. There were new meetings, new contracts, new ideas, but there was also rhythm. There were breakfasts with mismatched plates, lunches eaten on the front steps, bedtime stories read in alternating voices. There were school pickups, scraped knees, and impromptu sidewalk chalk murals. There were lazy Sundays with coffee and newspapers, and quiet moments when Camilla would look around and think, "This is the life I never knew I could have." One evening, a year later, she stood once again at the site of the original fire. The penthouse had not been rebuilt. She had ordered the floor to be converted into a non-profit workspace. It was no longer a symbol of what she had escaped, but a foundation for others to rise from. Griffin joined her at the window. "You all right?" She nodded. "Just remembering." He took her hand. "And?" "I'm glad it burned." She turned to him. "Because from the ashes, we made something better." He smiled. "We made everything." They walked back to the elevator together, hands joined. Behind them, the city glowed, not with fire, but with light, with life, with love, with home. And it was just the beginning.